Alrighty, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on this edition, this has been an episode a long time coming. I'll be listening and moderating a debate conversation on prostitution. Should prostitution be not only decriminalized but legalized? I'm joined by two feminist leftists, one who says yes and one who says no. My guests for this half-hour episode are returning champion Jennie-Laure Sully, who is a Haitian-Canadian leftist, feminist, anti-imperialist activist involved in Haitian solidarity activities, and she is a member of a feminist organization dedicated to eliminating human trafficking. The organization is called CALACS Francophone d'Ottawa, who is a
It's called CLE.
Yes.
CLES, Concertation des luttes contre l'exploitation sexuelle. But you can say CLE for short.
Click. Okay, perfect. And which is opposed to and she's they're opposed to legalizing prostitution and other forms of sex works. And Bess Goden is an American leftist. She's the host of Millennialsplaining, which is a YouTube podcast dedicated to discussing millennial situations economically, socio-politically, and humorously. And disclaimer, she doesn't hate boomers, okay, boomers? And yes, and she holds the opposite view. And let's get started. And firstly, ladies, thank you so much for taking the time on to come One Plus One to discuss this grossly taboo subject, which I'm amazed has such bitter divisions in the feminist movement and the wider left movement. And I was even telling you both on air that I had a friend who unfriended me for daring to want to even have this debate. Another past guest refused repeatedly to engage in this debate. So my many thanks to both of you for coming on, to discuss this topic.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very pleased to meet you as well, Jenny. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And I think, looking at what I saw from your organization, you guys do great work. And I do want to say, that it is a sticky situation, it is a sticky topic. And it's especially because the term sex work encompasses such a broad spectrum of experiences, really. But there is a conversation that's happening with sex workers and ex-sex workers about whether or not they want to be legalized, because it would encourage more contact with the police. And the police, as they are now, are extremely sexist, racist, and have a history of raping, all kinds of
and funny that you mentioned that. That's actually one of the questions I have prepared later on in this conversation.
Oh, okay. Well, we didn't even jump around or anything, but I will say that is probably part of the reason why people are afraid to sort of take a stance on the pro-sex worker side, because it is murky. It is an extremely murky situation, and I'm not sure that there's a right answer, to be honest. But we can talk about sex work in general, as a morality issue as well. Or whatever you'd like to begin with. So yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, actually, okay. Actually, yeah, Jenny, anything you want to say before I have my first question?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad I can meet Bess today and have this conversation. I think that, there's a lot to talk about in terms of terminology. That's one thing we can talk about. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the police, like you said, Bess. But in terms of my organization, we use the word women in situation of prostitution instead of sex work, and I can explain later why. But we do, when someone asks us to refer to them as a sex worker, we respect that on an individual basis, but we see things differently collectively. But I can explain that later.
Interesting. Well, that's a perfect segue into this question, which is so first question to you, Jenny. Let's start with you, which is, why are you against legalizing and decriminalizing prostitution? And And yeah, so give us like 3 points why why you are against legalizing and decriminalizing prostitution, because I think everybody would agree with you that we're against the forced sexual exploitation of women, children, or anybody really, and that form of organized crime. But why? Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, good question. First of all, I have to say that the question of legalizing prostitution or decriminalizing prostitution, this is a cause that I wasn't so much interested in a few, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I came to this subject, to this cause, to this question. I started being interested in this question when I started working in a rape crisis center in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. That's when I started reading a lot about it. That's when I started meeting women who were victim of rape and of sexual exploitation and of incest and other type of violence. What I learned from that experience is that all sexual violences are connected. There is a continuum of violence. And I learned also that a lot of women who end up in the prostitution system were subjected to violence when they were children, when they were young girls. And very often, how they end up in the sex industry is the result of that process of always being subjected to violence and being in a position where they are exploited, where their rights are not respected. And when we talk about the choice of entering, what I've found is that there are a number of circumstances that make it impossible to have another choice. They end up in the sex industry for lack of other alternatives. That's what I first realized. And then as I continued working with rape crisis centers, with feminist groups, I came to realize that other women did not have that trajectory and decided to enter the sex industry. There wasn't necessarily a trajectory of violence. There wasn't necessarily a pimp involved, and they decided to enter. And when I started talking to them also for a long period of time, after a while, they told me that the problem is they entered without having all of the knowledge of what was going on in the sex industry. So that's the ones who had a lot of, experience and were ready to get out, and they were finding out that they couldn't get out. So again, back to the question of choice. If you are brought into a system because of the violence that you experience, or if you are brought to a system because you decided, but then when you want to get out, you can't, that makes me that makes me come to the conclusion that this system is not based on women's choice, no matter how you look at it, no matter what trajectory you're looking at, okay? So if the system is not based on the choices of women, it is a sexist system. And furthermore, what I found out by reading about the sex industry, how it works in different countries, is that it's always very violent. If you read an article by Pottera, that's Potterat, I think, I don't remember the exact year, but he followed a cohort of prostituted women over several years. What he found is that this was the most violent occupation and he compared what was going on in the sex industry to very violent other activities. And this came out as where the sector where the mortality rate was the highest. Okay. And so knowing that it's the most violent, knowing that whether the person made the decision to enter or came to that sex industry, to that came to that system because of a trajectory of violence, knowing that the question of choice is not really a real choice, because when you make a choice, it has to be free and informed, and you have to be able to change your choice, right? So if you can't change your choice, there's a problem. It's hard to talk about consent or making a free choice if the possibility of exiting is not there. So for all those reasons, I realized that the best system was a system where you decriminalize the person offering sexual acts, her own sexual acts, and criminalizing those who make the system exist. So that's sex buyers and pimps. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when we say legalize prostitution or criminalize or decriminalize prostitution, people don't make those nuances. Okay? Because who are we talking about when we're talking about prostitution? When I'm talking about the prostitution, I'm talking about the system of prostitution, those who profit from it. And these are mostly men. These are often organized crime. These are, people that are not mostly women. So it is a patriarchal system. And, but I'm not saying that those who sell their own sexual acts should be criminalized. I'm not saying that. And in Sweden, they have a model which used to be called the Nordic model, and now we call the equality model. And that's what I think that we should do in terms of legislation. So that's my answer.
Interesting. Bess, so before you explain why you think prostitution should be legal and not just decriminalized, because I think it really is actually important when we do say that. So so before you explain why you think prostitution should be not just decriminalized but also legalized, is there anything Jenny said that you want to respond to? And you're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. There we go.
No problem.
Okay. Yes, actually. So I don't know that we disagree that much. I think that I agree with you on pretty much everything you said. I absolutely agree with the idea of decriminalizing the sex worker and criminalizing the sex buyer and the pimps. I think that's a great idea. I think that the argument for legalization of sex work is complicated, as I was mentioning before. That it is dependent. If I believe in if I believe in legalization of sex work, I believe in it in an ideal society. I don't necessarily believe in it in the society we currently live in, because again, I don't have as much trust with the cops, let alone people who've actually had the wrong side of the stick. There are so my experience with it is that I have I had engaged briefly in sex work for about 6 months. I was a secretary and I needed to make ends meet, and I considered it. My boyfriend at the time encouraged it. He didn't profit from it. He just was sort of supportive about it. That's a whole other emotional issue topic. But I did engage in it for about 6 months, and you're right that it is absolutely not about women's choice or women's pleasure if they're the one providing the sex work. That it is absolutely about, I mean, we don't call them Johns anymore, we call them clients. It's about the client's wishes and their wish, that sort of thing. And there's definitely a lot of violence. I experienced a lot of, like verbal abuse, certainly, in my brief period. And, I mean, debatably sexual abuse, I guess. But my point is this, it is, I absolutely agree that it is a patriarchal system in a patriarchal society, and that women do it out of desperation and survival. And that there are very few sex workers that do admit to enjoying sex work. And they do talk about how they have relationships with their clients and how, they provide, some kind of emotional support for them as well. And those situations absolutely do exist, but they are the vast minority of situations. Most situations are desperate, and a lot of situations end up being manipulated by men. I had a couple of instances where I was an independent worker. Okay, I was an independent worker, but I had to get a photographer. And so by doing that, I had to appeal to two different men to do that. And then at some point there was another man who was trying to get me into the porn movies, and so there was a whole other system of pimps trying to get their hands on me. You know what I'm saying? So you're 3,000,000% not wrong about that. But I do believe that sex work is legitimate work, and that in an ideal society and situation, that it should be okay and acceptable, as just as much okay and acceptable as seeing a therapist, to go and see a sex worker in a safe and consensual situation. That's how I feel.
Perfect segue to the third question. Jenny, anything Bess just said that you want to respond to?
Well, I want to respond to what you said, Bess. I think that thank you for sharing. I think it's really important. I think that women's voices with lived experience is really central to this topic. Here at La Clé, we're in our organization.
Actually, Jenny, if I can interrupt for just a second, the camera kind of cuts you off sometimes. Is there a way that you can
like this, or
bit
also
down?
lower it?
Yeah,
There
perfect.
Is that
perfect?
yeah?
Perfect. Okay, continue.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah, at La Clé we do have those conversations because we have like support groups. And we have women who are still in the industry, some that are out. We have women that are involved in our organization at every level, even on the board and everything. And a lot of us have experienced violence or sexism in different ways. And so it's really important to have that conversation also. And I think it's a lack of understanding of the of sexism and the violence and the harassment and the lack of options that often we have as women. And so very often it's that lack of an understanding that makes this conversation so difficult. Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, what you just shared with us. In terms of the political aspects of it, one thing that we have to realize is that the personal is political, and that it's important to have to hear all those personal stories, but then we have to go to the political aspect of all of this. When we talk about sex work being legitimate work, I think that on a personal level, if someone is in survival mode, is trying to make ends meet, is doing her best to survive, who am I to tell that person that what she's doing is not correct, or that she's wrong, or, unless I have money to give her, unless I have a job to give her, unless, I am no one, I can't talk, So when we're talking about legitimate on a personal level, what a person does on a personal level to survive is always legitimate. Okay? So that's what I'm going to say. I am not disagreeing with you on that. But when we're looking at the political level now, in terms of the law, in terms of what society we want to have, in terms of the long-term effects of certain policies, talking about sex work in a legal framework is not legitimate. That's what I want to, the distinction I want to make. The term sex work itself, I mean, it's not something that is recognized in international law. It's not something even at the union level. I know that some people have been trying to start unions, but when you look at all the rules of I have the words in French, santé, sécurité, all the rules in terms of safety and security. Is it the same thing in English? Like, there are rules about safety and security for work, okay? And I think unions look into that, and people who politicians are supposed to sort of have policies in terms of what is safe work, what is a safe work environment, make sure that the workers are in an environment that is not affecting their health, that is not affecting society as a whole. And decisions are sometimes taken to ban certain economic activities. Here in Quebec, Canada, people were working in asbestos mines. And at some point, it was decided that this was, not work that was legitimate because it was affecting the health of those involved, and it was affecting the environment, the society, and we moved away from that industry. That industry was not considered legitimate, and there were policies that recognized that. In terms of sex work, I think we have to be realistic. I've worked in a hospital, okay? When we would go to the lab and manipulate like samples of urine or bodily fluids, we were wearing protective gear. I had my, those big glasses that you wear. I forget the name in English. And that were the standards for safety and security in the work environment. If you try to do that in the sex industry ceases to exist. If you apply the rules that are applied, for example, in a hospital lab to the sex industry, that's when you realize that, this is not a safe work environment. And that's where that leads to, is this actually work or is it just exploitation?
I'd like
before I get to my question, my critical questions to Jenny, Bess, I actually feel that you,
let me respond to that. I actually, when I was a secretary, I was working in a laboratory, so I do understand what you mean by that. But I also think that there are differences between, hospitals, health and safety standards rather than doctor's visits. That there are different levels of those things. I believe that, let me put it this way. I believe that there is, societally speaking, we have sort of polarized the human experience between female and male And men are not societally allowed to feel certain things. They're not society allowed to express certain things. And I think that the ways that they do that, or the people that they feel most comfortable doing that with, are women. I think and that comes down to, as a feminist, I'm sure you're familiar with the mother versus the whore complex. That's absolutely what's going on here, that men are more comfortable speaking to women about the things that they're not supposed to be speaking about in general. And I do think that men are more likely to go to a prostitute than they are a therapist. I think that a lot of intimacy issues, a lot of intimacy needs that men who are sort of like incapable, there are a lot of men who are sort of incapable of dating properly. There are a lot of men who are like really bad at it and, have a hard time finding somebody else. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, there's many women that are like that as well. And I don't think that as a Band-Aid short-term, I don't think that it's necessarily the worst thing in the world to go to a trusted sex worker to relieve some of that. I don't think that, I think that it's important to distinguish that the difference between labor and exploitation is who is benefiting from it and how the labor is sort of performed and overseen, right? So I agree with you that in this current society, in 99% of the cases, there is some level of exploitation happening in sex work. But I also agree that 99.9% of cases, there's some level of exploitation, some level of exploitation exists within capitalism and all kinds of capitalist work. So I believe that sex work, prostitution, whatever you want to call it, is the oldest industry, and that it has been developed for a long time, and that there are certain in a way that supports the workers' rights and freedoms and safety. I think it's important to honor that there have been, millennia of sex workers that have developed skill sets and a culture around this profession. And that I think that's important to honor that. And it's important to honor those skills as something that's worthwhile, because the reason that we need sex workers in the first place is because we don't, right? We don't think that those qualities are worthwhile. We think those qualities are the qualities of a slave, right? I mean, essentially, that's what we're talking about. If you're a mother or a whore, you are essentially a slave, right? So because we are transitioning as a society, we are transitioning out of the idea of women as slaves in general. That I feel, that this is undergoing a similar transition, and put it that way. Because you could make similar arguments about domestic work as a wife. If you are, if you are a wife, you are performing pretty much the same duties plus, that you're performing as a sex worker, and you are doing it on a regular basis, and every day you're essentially like an in-home sex worker plus domestic plus friendship or whatever. And I'm not reducing every marriage to that. I'm not saying any every marriage should be transactional or whatever, but I am saying that there is an element of that. And in a capitalist patriarchal society, women have the choice. They have the choice between either going out into the world and getting a job where they probably won't be able to support themselves, because most of the jobs that women are generally able to get are paid way less than men. I mean, that's 77 cents to a dollar statistic is actually, you know, way off, considering like that's comparing like CEOs to CEOs. You know what I'm saying? Like that is not comparing the entirety of women versus the entirety of men. So it is extremely difficult to make your way in this world as a woman by yourself. Okay, I can tell you that as somebody who had to resort to sex work with a master's degree. And I've also been homeless. Okay, I've also lost my car. I've also lost my apartment. There's a lot of things. So my point is this. My point is that I think that it is possible for us to sit here and argue whether or not the act of sex work is sort of legitimate or moral or fair to each party, but it would sort of be impractical for us to do so because every situation of sex work is completely different. And you know, again, there are, you know, if you remove the elements of exploitation and sort of slavery that are associated with most you know, sex work positions, you know, and so one is truly an independent contractor and truly, you know, like has some sort of, you know, safety net for themselves, whether it be personal security, whether it be you know, like some kind of a contract with their clients or something, I don't know, you know, then I do believe that there is a legitimate need for that work, and that there are people who legitimately would enjoy doing that work in a safe environment.
Wow, lots to ponder and chew on that, and I'm glad that Jenny took notes on that. And Jenny, I will let you respond to Bess, but first, let me ask this question to you, Jenny, then, which is, now, Jenny, I completely understand. I think any decent person would be on your side when it comes to wanting to eradicate human trafficking and its subcategory of sexual slavery, sexual trafficking, and going after pimps, going after a low-level pimp, going after organized crime networks who engage in that. But isn't the state and society at large being too punitive when it comes to criminalizing persons who solicit sex, the clients who say yes, how much, when one should really only go after the pimp and the and the mafioso folks, and one should only respond to that before before I ask two follow-ups to that.
Trafficking is linked to prostitution. So if you have prostitution, you have trafficking. Trafficking does not exist by itself. Okay? Trafficking is linked to prostitution, and prostitution is linked to the demand from the client. Okay? So the pimps and the organized crime are trying to meet the demand of the client. Okay? And in a society where more and more we are being told that we should take responsibility for what we buy, I think it is important to hold the clients to hold them accountable. So that's my answer to your question. Should we go after the clients? We're a punitive society and everything, but what we see is a total impunity of sex buyers, clients of prostitution, total impunity. When we look at the statistic, in Canada and elsewhere, they are not bothered by the police. They are not bothered. It's really very, very rare that they will get arrested. And for a long time, those who were getting arrested, and that's the punitive side of it, were the women, were those selling their own sexual acts, and that was a problem. This is the reason why I think in the feminist movement, in the beginning, a lot of women came to the conclusion that what we needed was to legalize. When they were seeing all those women getting arrested, like, it was so unfair. But the thing is, legalizing, and it has been tried in Germany, does not protect the women. It does not protect the women. And total prohibition, having like all parties involved arrested, does not protect the women, of course, because when they say all parties involved will be arrested, it's mostly women who end up being arrested. So that's also a problem. This is why I'm getting back again to the equality model, where the model is you arrest the pimps, you also arrest the client of prostitution, the sex buyer. The system exists because of that demand from the client. And if we're telling people, you should stop buying, I don't know, you should stop buying cars that pollute. Eventually, everyone will have to buy electric cars. We're telling people to stop buying junk food. We're telling people to stop buying food that have GMO or whatever. We're trying to say, you as a buyer, you are responsible for the problems of capitalism. You do have a responsibility. You're not responsible for all of it, but you have to take responsibility and see what you can change in your behavior to not support that exploitation system. Okay? So we're saying the same thing to the clients of prostitution. So it's important. We're always talking about women. Is it their choice, not their choice? Why are men making that choice? Are they trying to buy consent? Can we have a conversation about that? Is it really therapeutic, for them to put themselves in a position where they go see a person who they don't know if she's been trafficked? Women in that industry, they have to pretend that they're always happy, the myth of the happy hooker, they have to pretend that everything's good, and they're going to see that person and saying, okay, I need you to help me with my intimacy issue. There is a power imbalance that makes this relationship problematic at its core. And I'm not sure that that's the way that men can solve their intimacy issues, their issues of, being forced by a patriarchal society to not be connected to their feelings. All of what you talked about, Bess, I think it's really important. But in a system where consent is being bought, that, you have to be there has to be some sort of equality between the therapist and the one seeking therapy. There has to be, and that doesn't exist in the prostitution system, unfortunately. Well, that's what it is. And I don't think there is a need for sex work, personally. There's a study that was done in France that shows that there are consequences on society as a whole in terms of injuries that women have, and they have to go to the hospital. So that's a burden on the health system. Very often, there's an impact on the children, of prostituted women. There's mental health issues. The organized crime gets bigger and bigger, and that has an issue on the whole economy. You have there's a whole host of consequences that shows that this is bad for the society as a whole. So that study was done. I forget the name of the study, but it's a study that was done in French about the consequences of prostitution.
Here's a question I wanted to ask the both of you. This is a follow-up question, but and actually this is a question I want to ask the both of you. And Bess, you can be the first to respond, followed by Jenny, which is, now again, I think everybody can agree that the coercion, the violent coercion of somebody being prostituted, we should eradicate that, and we should always go after organized criminals, human traffickers, whatever you want to call them. It's more or less the same thing. So, and everybody does, and everybody, of course, wants to go after the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world. But when it comes to criminalizing the buyers, so a man or anyone, but it's mostly men. Let's not beat around the bush. Like a man who gets like approached by a woman who might be a self-employed prostitute, or might be a trafficked prostitute, or might even come from some sort of a legitimate business like the escort services. I mean, because when we criminalize, I mean, my question basically is like, shouldn't we only criminalize the buyer, the Johns, the buyer, if they act violently towards the prostitutes?
Okay.
Bess, your response followed by Jenny's.
Sure. Well, so it's, I mean, okay. It sounds to me like criminalizing the buyer is part of a larger tactic to end sex work in general. Okay. And alone that wouldn't be enough. I personally don't believe that criminalizing being a client of a sex worker is actually going to do much. I think that's going to be like worse than prohibition. I think that need has existed throughout time and will continue to exist. Do I agree that it's not the best way to take care of these issues? Absolutely. I don't think it's a healthy way to take care of these issues. But do I think that people do it? Yes. Do I think that there is a alcohol industry? Yes. Do I think there is a cigarette industry? Yes. I mean, there are plenty of products that are sort of like harmful to the user, that again, I mean, and I'm not arguing. It seems to me that in the scenarios that you keep bringing up, Jenny, that you do keep referring to the more, unfortunately the more common situations of working in a brothel, working with a pimp, or under some kind of exploitive system. And you're right, it is more common. However, if we're talking about this in the abstract, and we're talking about this in, as a societal, I certainly believe that sexual needs are legitimate. I believe that people who cannot satisfy them in certain ways may want to satisfy them in different ways. I think there are plenty of people who do so consensually, in underground sex clubs and that sort of thing, like sort of on their own, like not related to prostitution whatsoever. There are plenty of people who do that, sort of for funsies. And that there are a lot of people who would like to do it for funsies, but don't know who to ask. So I do believe that being a professional in that arena is, again, a legitimate legitimate profession, in the way that women and sex workers have throughout history, again, shaped this profession and shaped how it's done, shaped the skill sets and the culture surrounding it. Now, do I think that the clients should be penalized? I think that it, it's a good, in the scenario that you proposed, if you want to do it like that would be a good way to do it. I don't necessarily think that it would help sex workers as much as perhaps we think. I think that people are going to patronize sex workers regardless of the legality of any of it. Even if, they're like, I mean, like, some dudes wouldn't just risk jail, they would risk their lives to get a good, you know what I mean? So like, there, I believe that there are legitimate, I believe that there, it is because of the faults of a patriarchal society, as I was saying, but I believe there are legitimate needs that sometimes it is perhaps safer to go to a sex worker than it is to look for it in the open. And again, there is a lot of violence involved here. This is why having conversations like these is very trepidatious, because every situation is so vastly different. A lot of the situations that you brought up globally are unfortunately in the majority. A lot of those violent situations, and that you can't express, whether or not in the moment you still, I mean, I've had experiences that have been like that, where like in the moment I didn't feel comfortable saying no because the guy wouldn't stop anyway. You know what I'm saying? So like it's like not only is our sex industry rife with those incidences, but also our relationships, our entire society is sort of structured around male pleasure and not female pleasure. And this is a problem that expands throughout every industry. And I feel again that the sex industry is one of the canaries in the coal mine, but it is it is still one of the affected industries.
Well, then in that case, hold that thought. So actually, Jenny, don't respond to my question about only going after the violent clientele. I wanted to ask actually. So I'm switching my questions around a bit. So Jenny, I want you to answer this, which is, has the Dutch model, Belgian model, German or Kiwi, New Zealand, or the Aussie model of legalized sex work, some forms of decriminalized sex works, has any of those models appeal to you? And if the answer is a huge categorical no, then I'm very curious as to why.
Okay. I've been hearing about those models for years and years, and I was always skeptical about them because I was also hearing testimonies I was hearing reports and what I was listening to the voices of the women living in those countries, and I was always following them on Facebook and on social media. And a lot of women from New Zealand, a lot of women from Germany have said that it's not working out for them. In Germany, there's Huska Mal, so it's Huska, and last name is Mau, who said that they promised us rights, they promised us everything would be better. In the end, the only one who won something were the businessmen and the owners of the big brothels. What they have now in Germany is a huge industry where the individual woman or person, whoever who is in that system, has very little right. And it's just a model where they have to pay for their rooms, they have to pay fees for a number of things, and they are not more protected. They don't have more rights. They're saying the model doesn't work. Dutch women, I've spoken with Dutch women. I've been in contact with them by Zoom, and they told me what happened is that the system went after the most vulnerable. So in the Netherlands, in that system, those who are overrepresented there are migrant women, and so you have that's going on. In New Zealand, we see also it's the most disadvantaged women who end up in there. Sabrina Valise, I think her name is Valisce. I'm not sure there's a C there. She was a woman, I think it's New Zealand. I'm not sure if it's New Zealand or Australia. I'm mixing up the two. So look up her name. Mm-hmm. She was campaigning for the legalization system. And once it happened, a few years later, she said, this is not in our interest at all. Not in our interest at all. So that's what I think we need to look at. And in 2012, there's a study that came out by economists from the London School of Economics. So the main author is Neumayer, that's Neumayer, I think, or Neumeyer. I'm forgetting, but you can look it up. It's 2012. Yes, 2012. And what they found is that when you have a legal system, the illegal system stays there and actually grows. So the legal side of the prostitution system in many countries, they looked at over 100 countries with different legislative systems. And in the countries where it was legalized, you had a legal sector, but you also had to answer those legal sector because there's not enough women who are doing well, who will go and actually get hired in the brothels. They weren't finding enough women. Like the legal sector, they didn't have enough women to meet the demand of the client or sex buyer. So they had to turn to human traffickers because they weren't able to have enough women in their brothels. So when you look at that study, the conclusion is the legal sector is fueling trafficking because they need more women. They need more women. They need more variety. That's what the clients are asking for. So whenever you have legalized prostitution, you also have a raise in the rate of trafficking. That was that conclusion of that 2012 study.
That's a perfect segue to these two questions I have for you, Bess. So I'm going to put on the anti-prostitution hat and just ask this. So, Bess, isn't legalizing prostitution? Aren't we normalizing the unthinkable, and that is legalized sexual exploitation and abuse of men, abuse of women or men or non-binary folks who find themselves in a rather seedy, dodgy world? And I'm just going to throw in this follow-up question, which is what examples of legalized prostitution or decriminalized prostitutions do you think is the model we should, that we should adopt? Because we have seen the limitations of an industry like the gambling industry. I know you're from I know you're based in New Jersey, and places like Atlantic City, places like Las Vegas, where people can gamble legally. Despite all of that, and despite the fact that if you have any kind of association with the mob, if you have a criminal background, you're not supposed to be given, your gambling license. We still do see people who finding themselves at the mercy of mobsters and other very, dodgy people. Wouldn't that actually be the same if we were to legalize prostitution, even if we had, the best of intentions and said that prostitutes have the right to unions, they have the right to collective bargaining, they have the right to, yeah. Your response to that? And you're muted right now. Oh, Bess, you're muted right now.
Sorry. You bring up excellent points. Jenny brought up excellent points. That this is why this conversation is so complicated. I definitely do not think within our current, in America, I can't speak for other countries. In America, in our current policing system, do I think it would be wise to legalize prostitution right away? Just let's go. No,
well, I don't. Let me just say, as somebody who doesn't subscribe to anti-Americanism, I would say the same about every other advanced capitalist society, including the ones with nice health care.
I just didn't want to speak for the world, but no, I can't speak for anybody but myself. And so I think that any kind of legalized system would have to be driven by the sex workers. It would have to be regulated by the sex workers and not the police. And I think that it would definitely have to come from within the community. I don't think that we are in anywhere near of a place where the government could coordinate with a, semi-official sex worker board of safety. You know what I'm saying? But I do think that would be the ideal, that would be a first step in the ideal world. I don't think, I definitely think that there are a lot of things done through legal means that are still can be classified. If you look at it broadly, it can still be classified as sort of mob activity and illicit activity and promoting exploitation. I think that the case that you brought up with having to staff a brothel with trafficked workers is absolutely one of those instances. And I don't, absolutely, I would never support that, of course. And certainly that must also have to do with, like, I find that the legal world is always an extension of who's in power to begin with. So if you have, like let's take Atlantic City, for example, right? Gambling is a perfect example. If you had mobsters from the 50s running Atlantic City, they're still doing it. It's just that they're doing it from office now. They're doing it because they're paying a guy from office now. You know what I'm saying? So in a situation like that, where you have people trafficking to staff brothels because they just legalized it, most likely that entire situation, even the legalization aspect of it, was run by the exploiters, not the exploited, right? So we would want the entire movement run by the exploited. That would be the hope, right? And again, I don't have a specific prescription, and I'm sorry to disappoint you guys. I definitely think that we're in the arena of experimentation. I definitely think that there hasn't been a model yet proposed and or enacted that has worked out well. Everybody sort of seems to have complaints with it. But I do believe that it's the kind of thing that we're going to have to trial and error, and until we sort of get it righter, and I definitely believe that it's worth trying to do that, because I believe that sex workers should be protected, and I believe that society at large should be protected, as you mentioned, that sex workers are not the only people affected by these communities, by this sort of industry. The entire society at large can be affected, especially if you're talking about disease and whatnot. So yeah, I definitely think that it's the society we need to deal with, and that we haven't. And I think that we need to stop having discussions about whether or not it's moral for the sex worker to offer sex work, whether it's, and I appreciate that you said that, Jenny, that anybody who does something out of survival, that you're like, who am I to judge what you've done and whatever. And I feel that way 100%. And I'm so glad that you said that, because there are a lot of people, sort of on the right wing who don't feel that way. And they're trying to end prostitution sort of from the other side of the spectrum. So I do think that it's important to do whatever happens, whatever steps are taken, whatever, whatever the movements in this country are able to work out for themselves. I mean, I think that, again, that this is going to have to be a sex worker led movement.
Well, Jenny, actually respond to this question I have prepared, which is, now, isn't legalized prostitution better? Because firstly, there are some women, and yes, I do concede that it's a minority, but there are some women and some men and non-binary folks who might see them. I mean, we might see them as disturbingly eccentric, but there are people who do want to be a sex worker, and they are a sex worker and don't want to be harassed by the police. There are others who want to run a legitimate business. And if you have it legalized, the state can make sure that someone with a criminal background who was associated with organized crime or even the CIA is barred. Workers would be allowed to form unions, the right to collective bargaining, and safety. So making sure that everybody gets like free, checks for like STDs, making sure that like clients aren't carrying STDs and so forth like that, and have the right to go on strike if the conditions are deplorable. And you can have also folks who secretly monitor to make sure that the workers, the prostitutes, isn't being abused or coerced and isn't doing any illicit activities on the side. So you can monitor those activities taking place. And the moment a person's life is in danger, you could have like security, protects the person from some crazed person who wants to murder the prostitute. and that whenever a person decides to quit the life of prostitution, the person won't be slut shamed and won't and the businesses can have to eliminate any tapes of them engaging in in sexual acts so that they don't so that they don't become blackmailed or blacklisted and shunned in the future. I'm curious your response to that.
If we're talking about individuals who are saying they want to do this for whatever reason and they don't want to be bothered, the way to respect them and protect them is to decriminalize that individual selling her own or his own sexual acts. And this is the model that has been applied in Sweden since 1999. Since 1999, and studies have been done. There's a lot of misinformation out there saying that the model doesn't work, whatever. But I've read a variety of sources, and what has happened is a lot of the traffickers left Sweden and went elsewhere. But in Sweden, we have those who are still selling their own sexual acts, speaking up and saying that they feel comfortable going to the police because of the law. They can call the police and say, hey, this man who's my client has just hit me. I need your protection. And the police will go there and arrest the man and ask her, do you need anything else? Do you want to go to a women's shelter? Are you okay? And that is all that they will ask. She is not criminalized. They will not tell her, are you selling? And should we have you come with us to the station? They're not doing that. So that's the testimonies that I'm hearing from the women in Sweden. Okay, so that's what we need. And it has changed the power balance because all the women who are selling their own sex acts, they don't have a pimp, they feel comfortable calling the police and the client will be arrested. So there's something I wanted to say about, what was it? We were talking about like in an ideal society. We're in patriarchy. We have to acknowledge that. When we look at Germany, what has been done was legalization since 2002. Okay, and it was supposed to help, fight STDs. It was supposed to help all those involved, the women and men and non-binary folks involved in the sex industry to get social services. It was supposed to help them get protection from the police. None of that has happened. There are statistics coming out and saying that the pimps, the violent pimps, are not being arrested. There's more trafficking there. A lot of women are women coming from Eastern Europe who are, the most disadvantaged women. And what was promised as a result of that did not happen. Those who end up profiting from that system are the brothel owners. And what they're doing now is that they're contributing to political parties to make sure that the system doesn't change, even though we're getting all those reports from what has happened in Germany since 2002. Same thing in the Netherlands. So again, it's not about saying that, okay, we want to go after the individual. There is a way to protect the individual selling their sexual acts. There is a way to do that. And Sweden has shown that it's possible. But we need to talk about the system. The system needs to be criminalized.
Interesting. And
would you mind respond to that real quick?
Yes, but yeah, respond real quick because I have my last question for you and then my last question for Jenny, and then we have to wrap it up.
Sorry. So no, I think that you're right. I think that you're right that we live in a patriarchal society. I think that you're right that a lot of the things that I'm talking about are in an ideal society and we're not there yet. And I think that a way to get there could be the model that you're proposing. I don't know enough about the Swedish model myself, but I'm definitely going to look into it after this conversation. I definitely think that you're right in the way that it is about changing the power balance. Before we can really do anything legally speaking, we need to change the power balance and put the sex workers in charge as much as we can. We need to be able to give them, sort of the ground to stand on, to be able to claim their own. There's going to be a struggle between sex workers and their pimps. There's always going to be, in the effort of legalization as well. And I hope that that struggle occurs and the sex workers are able to define their own terms in legalization. So I appreciate you bringing up that model and being more specific about it. And I certainly agree that it's an excellent step forward. And I would fight for it. Why not?
Well, it's interesting. I think, Bess, you being a former sex worker, I actually wanted to ask you this question because I think you brought up something very, very important, which is overlooked, and I actually think doesn't get talked about enough in the conversation. A lot of the conversation when it comes to prostitution is us having compassion for the women or anybody else, but mostly the women who find themselves in this horrific situation where they are trafficked and so forth like that. But I also find that there is another underhanded tragedy, which is people who have mental health issues. And we live in a society where even some of the best advanced capitalist social democratic societies don't have a universal mental health care system. It's completely separate. And I do find that I think even if we did have a good legalized form of prostitution, or even if we that there's always that need is always going to be there because there is a lot of men with mental health problems who can go on who can go on dates because they're either socially awkward. So, there are autistic men who are very great at whatever they do in school and in work and so forth, but do lack the social skills to try to approach a woman for a date and for any kind of consensual sexual act. So do you think that that while we should have a good, safe form of legalized prostitution, we also, while eradicating the patriarchy, which has been talked about enough, but that we also do need more sexual health workers to help people with their intimacy issues, with their sexual desires that they're not getting because they simply for whatever reason.
That's an interesting thought, and something I hadn't previously considered. But yeah, I mean that may, it's possible that in the future that there's already sex therapists, right? They're not technically sex workers; they're actual therapists that counsel couples in sex, right? So there may be something like that happens in the future, and I sort of hope it does. But I think that
I've also and sorry to interrupt, but I've also heard that that also people with severe disabilities, unable to use their hands or not able, or not even or even paralyzed, not even not able to use their sexual organs in consensual sex, that a lot of them feel I've heard that a lot of them do turn to prostitution, legal or otherwise, to get that which is deprived of them. So
get that which we all desire. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
I've seen a couple of documentaries where I've seen either a wheelchair user or a little person or an amputee say that they lost their virginity to a sex worker because they couldn't any other way. And I definitely, again, I do think that it is a need that has persisted throughout time, and that it's not going to go away if we want it to. I do think that it is a sort of I guess I don't want to say like not, it's sort of a function of patriarchal society. Okay. And I think that when we deal with the issues of patriarchy, we need to deal with them in a holistic way. Because, and again, this is what I'm about to say is not practically actionable. And for practically actionable things, I do believe you should turn to Jenny. But if talking about, if we're just talking about theory here, and we're talking about, how men are oppressed by the patriarchy, which is a conversation that feminists do not have enough, and that we should invite men to have with us. That one of the ways that men are oppressed by the patriarchy is emotionally speaking, as I was saying before, and intimately speaking as well. I mean, even the need to shake someone's hand or give them a hug, kiss them on a cheek. These are things that women who are friends would do for each other, but men are not allowed to do that for each other. And even if, I'm best friends with a gay guy, like, I've sort of experienced, several, iterations of cisness and whatnot. Oh my God, please stop calling me right now. I mean,
it's okay. Go on.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter how you, okay, so this is my view of feminism in general, and it's a little bit weird. But I believe that society forces us to identify with one of two cultures, male culture or female culture, and that we're all actually a combination of both. We have a relationship with male culture, we have a relationship with female culture, no matter how you identify with yourself, because we've grown up within the binary. Culturally speaking, you can't deny that. I like to refer to, instead of when we're talking about men and women, like in the generality, I would prefer to say female culture and male culture, because I definitely believe that there are men that grew up within female culture and identify more with female culture than they do with male culture, but they still have some effects on male culture. So, I definitely think that, this is, again, this is definitely a complicated conversation, and it's one that we need to be having more often. It's one that we need to be, considering, because these are the reasons that men feel the need to take a wife. The men feel, there have been statistics because we have to look at like the marital system and relationships, not only from the perspective of personal need, but also from the perspective of economy. Right. So, and I'm sorry if I'm getting off on a tangent here, but, men may feel, I'm sorry, I know we got to wrap up. And men may feel the need, as do many women, to enter into a relationship for personal survival. Okay. And so the need to take a wife, the need to have somebody at home who does your cooking for you and shit like that, that can be alleviated by a shifting of society in general, and that's what I hope to see. I'm a socialist. I'm more interested in socialist, communist ideas and the way to run society, and I think that this is a huge conversation we can have another day. But
we will, and this will definitely be the first of many conversations, because, as you both have demonstrated, one cannot talk about eradicating prostitution or even having prostitution with a human face without talking about the biggest taboo in the world, which is patriarchy, violent masculinity, and so forth. So if I can interrupt you, then my second to last question has to be to Jenny, because I believe you have to go soon, Jenny. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Jenny.
I said I canceled my other appointment. I'm just
Okay, okay, all right. Okay, okay, okay.
Swept up in this conversation.
Okay, I got three more. Okay, I got three more things, and then we can wrap up. So then, my second to last question to Jenny, is is the following. Now, I don't know, Jenny, if you are a police abolitionist or a radical reformist. And before I ask my big question, where actually do you stand on police state terror? Are you radical reformist, which is we need to demilitarize the police and end things like the drug war and stuff like that, or do you believe actually in like abolishing the police?
I have read what the Black Alliance for Peace have been working, Black Agenda report. There's also, I think it's Netta Freeman, and they're calling for
community
control of the police. And I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, that's good. So I would definitely, yes. So I would definitely classify you as a radical reformist then. Okay, then in that case, now I know Robin Maynard, one of Canada's most well-known Black Canadian leftist and outspoken abolitionist. Now, she in her superb tour de force book, Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to the Present, she talks about the terror that illegal sex workers face, often Black and Indigenous, and those of a trans background, both fully trans and others who are who have not who are not fully transitioned yet. And she talks about them and their constant experience and the constant danger they face coming from the police who engage in sexual violence, sexual blackmail, and threats that they'll report their children to social services unless they basically become like their sex slaves and and all of that. So now Robin believes that she thinks prostitution should be legal to address this, and if we want to see a huge reduction of state violence, even abolishing the police, then we shouldn't let prostitution be a criminal matter. And like the drug war, it gives the worst of both worlds when it comes to organized crime, police state terrorists, and neo-Keynesian folks and people who are very punitive towards those who are poor and feel that this is a desperate situation. They have to resort to prostitution. So I'm curious your response on that.
I disagree. I disagree about the way that it's I disagree about the belief that what we need to do is make the police completely out of the picture to create a situation where they're completely not punitive of the system. I disagree with that. I agree that there was a problem where women were being arrested, they were being targeted, and that was that's been documented. They were targeted. The law in Canada changed in 2014. We have a law that is inspired from the Swedish model, but is not as good, unfortunately. But it's inspired from that.
Yeah,
it's since 2014, so it's been over 10 years. And since that law has been passed, the number of arrests of women fell dramatically. It was up in the thousands, like when they did like the first report, and it fell to about 5 when they calculated like the effect of the law. I think the law was there was a review, and they showed a drastic fall of the number of arrests by having that model that I've been talking about, which some call the equality model, some call it the Swedish model, the Nordic model, because there's also, I think, Norway and Finland, or I'm not sure about, anyways, there's other Scandinavian countries who adopted that model. And now there's over 10, I think about 10 or a dozen countries around the world that have adopted it. So obviously, what we need to do in our society is to have a community-controlled police that go after those who exploit and those who are committing crime against the most disadvantaged people. We don't want them to go criminalizing disadvantaged people. That's not what we want. But we do want them to do that, you know, because how do you stop impunity if you don't have a community-controlled police going after those committing crimes? Like after 2008, one of the problems after the crash, you know, was that there was impunity. Madoff was put in jail. I think that it was the only one, but why didn't the others, you know, those other financial criminals get put in jail?
I have to interrupt here. The reason why Madoff got away was because he was just your run-of-the-mill con artist, whereas because a lot of people conflate what the banks did to, you know, homeowners and home buyers with Madoff. But no, Madoff was just a run-of-the-mill Ponzi scheme, whereas the banksters, they literally got away with impunity.
So yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. Impunity is a problem. So I agree that we do need to do radical reforms, and we do need to change the police, but to get them off the backs of those being victimized and to go after the oppressors. We want them to go after the oppressors, and if they won't do it, we have to make them do it. That's what I believe. So that's my answer to what Robin Maynard talked about. But I want to go back to the first question. I think what Bess was saying was really interesting, and she talked about, you know, sex therapists and about the need to have those conversations. And again, about men connecting to their emotions and everything. We need to talk about what is a healthy sexual relationship, and a relationship where those who are involved are, you know, both feeling that this is it's not beneficial, but it's good for them, you know. We need to know what is equality in sexuality. And we don't have that. And in that context, I'm not sure that what we need is sex workers. Because sex worker is just it's reproducing what's wrong with the capitalist system in the intimate sphere, okay? We're taking a model about the worker and the patron, or, you know, the worker and the boss, and we're reproducing that in our intimacy. I don't think that's how you get to healthy and equal sexual relationships. That's just my 2 cents, but I do think we need to have more conversation about what is a healthy sexual relationship. I think we've lost track of that. We're talking about sexual needs, but are sexual needs sexual rights? Can we have that conversation? There's a lot of entitlement on the part of men regarding what they expect sexually, you know, and it's at the detriment of what women expect, you know. So there's all that conversations that we need to have. And I want to go back again to Sweden because after applying their models, they did a survey to young men, I think like college educated men, and they asked them what they think about buying sex, because, you know, it's been criminalized since 1999. You can't be a sex buyer. And a lot of them were saying, well, if I want to have sex, why should I pay for it? Sex buyers are losers. That was the type of answers that were coming out of that survey. So, like, it's almost a generation, but they have a total different perspective about sex. And I think that's where we need to get to. And if people need to talk about their emotions, talk about what they want sexually, and find someone who can have mutual needs, and they can satisfy each other, I think we're not there yet. We still live in a society where it's all about the male gaze. It's all about men's entitlement.
And
Like when we look at the movie,
straight male gaze on straight male gaze on top of that.
yes, straight male gaze, definitely. So I think in terms of sexuality, we have so much growing to do. And I don't think that growing, is going to be done by reproducing what the exploitation that exists in a capitalist system in our bedrooms.
Interesting.
I actually completely.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Bess. Go ahead.
Can I respond? Yeah, actually, first of all, that was excellently put and a fascinating point. But I do believe that it is, for example, scientific developments have been made within, the private science industries, right? Like private studies have made scientific advancements. We have sort of looked to each industry at large as sort of the the forefront of that. So I'm not expressing myself properly. What I'm trying to say is that what I'm trying to say is that within every industry, it's natural that there is not only education and structure developed within that industry, but it's also part of the private sector that leads that development. Okay, that's what I'm trying to express. In a capitalist society, we have to admit that that's how it functions. And so, relating to what you just said about advancing ourselves, learning about ourselves sexually, I do believe that sex workers provide a space in which you can learn about yourself sexually. I do believe that that everything that you said about us trying to figure out as humans how to have an equitable, real caring relationship, and we're completely babies at. Absolutely, we have so much more work to do on that front. We absolutely have so much more work to do on the front of making, talking about, even phrasing the way that we discuss sexual experiences as non-male or non-patriarchal. And I definitely think that there's a lot of work for that to be done. I do not believe that it is the current sex. I don't believe that the current sex industry has any interest in pushing the boundaries or changing the patriarchy in any way. However, I do believe because it exists and provides a space for people to express things that are, because that's another thing. We're talking about the patriarchy, but we're also talking about clients who go to sex workers often express desires that are suppressed by the patriarchy, and not just emotions. We're also talking about sexual desires that are oppressed by the patriarchy, including, submission being one of the things, and I'm sure you could go into all of it. But that's something that is valuable in yourself to explore as part of your own sexual development, and that is again a space that is provided not only by sex workers but by porn. And is it a great idea to learn about sex through porn? Absolutely not. Of course not. Okay.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree that all porn, even lesbian porn, unfortunately, is extremely biased towards the male gaze. But I do believe that as a society, we need to work on changing that in general. And sex workers in the sex industry is going to be a part of that. Not necessarily, yeah.
Bess, any other closing remarks you want to make to pitch to folks, especially left-leaning and our fellow leftists, why they should be supportive of sex work being legalized and unions expanding sex work as part of their unions? Any closing remarks you want to make? And then Jenny can make any closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up.
I think the best thing that you can do as a sex worker is to get organized with other sex workers. I think that if you're interested in, if you're not a sex worker and you're interested in sex workers' rights, then it's definitely, should absolutely look into Jenny's organization, other organizations that are trying to do similar things, and try to help out that way. But I do think that that this is going to be a multi-step process. And I do think that the first thing that needs to happen is for sex workers to build their own power base. And it can happen. I think we've seen certain sex workers rise to certain positions, like Stormy Daniels. I think we've seen somebody who ran for New York mayor like 10 years ago, who was in the same race as the guy who was like, the rent is too damn high. And she was a sex worker who had worked her way up to, I guess, managing other sex workers. And so, again, I'm not saying that capitalism is the best system at all. I'm a socialist. I would never fucking say that. But because this is the world we live in, and this is how we've been making advancements so far, I do think that some advancements within a situational and personal person basis can be made, are being made through sex and through porn. And I definitely think through at large as well. I definitely think that our acceptance of porn in general as a society, our willingness to talk about sex at all, willingness to have these conversations, to say the word sex worker, say the word prostitute. I mean, like, all of these things are unfortunately an advancement. And so they're necessary advancements until we can take the next step. So I completely agree that the first thing that you need to do is make sex workers safe, and that the Swedish model sounds like an excellent way to do it. And that sex workers, once you are safe, you need to start building community and building power within yourselves. Otherwise, you could try to legalize sex work, but it's not going to work out for you. You're still going to be controlled by other people. It has to come from the sex workers themselves.
Jenny, any closing remarks you want to make? And then we got and then Bess, because it's her first time, we have to do the Inside the Actor Studio questionnaire, but you don't have to stay for that in case you have other things you need to do. So Jenny, any final remarks?
Yes, one thing I haven't spoken enough about during this conversation is about the survivors. We need to listen to survivors of sexual exploitation, survivors of the sex industry a lot more. They are organizing across the world. There's an organization called CAP, C-A-P, Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution, that you should be following. And about the Swedish model, there's a blog that you can go look at. It's called Nordic Model now, because it used to be called Nordic Model. So if you go there, you will see. In New York, you have New Yorkers for the Equality Model. All of those sources will provide you with a lot of testimonies from survivors. And so I think that we need to listen to what they have to say, because a lot of them used to support the idea of sex work or legalizing sex work. And they say that after a while, they've realized that it was not something realistic. Because, I mean, in what activity, other economic activity, do you have more value the younger you are? I mean, this is what we're talking about. If you have like a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, you have more value in that industry than someone who's 26, 27 and have been there for years. It's the only industry where you could actually do the work passed out and it wouldn't change anything. It's the only industry where actually you are at higher risk of STDs, of all the violence and pregnancy, and actually dying more than other industries. Like I've said when I started, I want to go back to that study from Potera. And I think what survivors are saying is that actually it seemed like a good idea. And what we are seeing from many countries who've tried it it seemed like a good idea, but in practical terms, it's not, because what is being reproduced is the exploitation that we do see in the capitalist system. So what we need to work on as socialists, as people who are interested in equality, is actual equality between men and women. The violence against women is something that we need to really be ending. And as long as that violence is there, it's really hard for me to imagine that we can have a system of prostitution that can be anything but violence. Of course, there are exceptions,
Yeah.
but the violence is the norm.
Jenny, do you want to stay for Bess answering the inside the actor studio question there?
Sure. I have nothing else.
Right.
I ended up staying longer than
before we sign off, so Bess, we usually end the program if somebody's been on the if it's a first time person on the show, or if it's a long time person on the show, with the questionnaire that was done by Marcel Proust, later the late Bernard Pivot, and the late great James Lipton of Inside the Actor Studio did this questionnaire. It's your turn to do it, so let's go. Jenny, Bess, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word?
Yeah.
Cheesecake.
What's your least favorite word?
I honestly don't even know.
Okay. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
A lot of things. Colors, the rainbow, Art Nouveau,
okay.
National music, a bunch of shit, random stuff.
Okay, then what turns you off then?
Turns out westerns, cowboys, cowboy boots, cowboy hats.
I think all of our I think anyone who's involved in Indigenous solidarity would completely agree with you on that one. Then what is your favorite curse word?
There are so many good ones. I do say fuck a lot.
Huh?
I do say fuck a lot.
Okay, no problem. Then what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
Well, dislike is easy, like nails on a chalkboard. That's horrifying. Sounds I do like. Well, I like music.
Okay. We can take that. Music. Then what profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to attempt to do?
Well, that's hard because I don't really have a defined profession. So I once wanted to be on Broadway. No.
Okay, no problem. And then what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Gravedigger.
Gravedigger. Gravedigger. Okay. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision of the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please do answer the question.
Well, I'd like to believe that the universe is energy and that I will not have a solid being after I'm dead. So I don't want to be in a state where language is possible. So how about
that? Interesting.
Floating in it's not cookie dough center of the universe, and I don't want there to be a god. I don't want there to be ghosts, and I really don't want there to be ghosts or an afterlife. Okay.
All right. I'll leave that. We were joined on this edition of 1+1, a special, I wouldn't even say debate, but let's just say a special debate conversation on whether us leftists and socially liberal folks should be for legalizing prostitution or not. I just want to say I'm actually still agnostic on the topic. So that being said, I'm looking forward to revisiting this topic in the future with both of you, and also one-on-one conversations. And viewers, listeners, please, I'm curious your comments. So please leave comments in the comment section, or get in touch via Twitter, Instagram, or my email, yurismeller@gmail.com. And also, 1+1, you can now donate to 1+1. I'll make sure to link the PayPal page for that. And we were joined by returning champion Jennie-Laure Sully, who is a Haitian Canadian leftist, feminist, anti-imperialist activist involved in Haitian solidarity activities, and she's a member of the feminist organization that's dedicated to eliminating human trafficking. Remind us what it is, Jenny, because I always seem to get it wrong. So remind us your organization.
La Clé, CLES.
Okay, and and we were also joined by first-time guest Bess Goden, who is an American leftist. She's the host of Millennialsplaining, which is a YouTube podcast dedicated to discussing millennial situations economically, socio-politically, and of course, very humorously. Ladies, thank you so much for this. Best of luck to the both of you and in this. And I've heard great arguments on both sides, so I'm just going to conclude by saying, here's hoping a better world can be formed where one where people aren't sexually exploited and feel that this is the only way to make a living, but also if one wants to do it, that there is no stigmata, no marginalization, and treated condescendingly and paternalistically by some of us who may have socially conservative blind spots. Thanks to you both, and have a great weekend. Power to the people, death to the patriarchy. So, signing off.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.